Have you ever stopped to think about what happens when we fire the very person who was protecting us? It was exactly 3:17 a.m. when the lights of the old Riverside factory in Detroit began to turn on one by one, in perfect synchronicity, as if invisible hands were flipping each switch with millimeter precision. The detail that transforms this from strange to absolutely terrifying. That factory was completely empty, without a single employee, without human surveillance, abandoned to the silence of the early morning. And you know what makes it all even more disturbing? The night watchman, the man who for 11 years had looked after that place as if it were his own home, had been fired that same afternoon, just hours before. Marcus Thompson was no ordinary employee. He was one of those professionals you rarely find these days, dedicated, meticulous, tireless. While others slept on the job, Marcus patrolled every hour, noting every suspicious detail in his worn notebook, and knew every corridor, every door, every dark corner of that factory like no one else. But to the company's new managers, those young executives obsessed with cost-cutting and technology, Marcus was just a problem. A paranoid security guard who saw threats where none existed. An outdated employee who needed to be replaced by automatic cameras and motion sensors. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever been ignored when you tried to warn someone about something important? Have you ever felt like nobody took you seriously, even when you were absolutely sure of what you were saying? Well, that's exactly what happened to Marcus. And when he handed in his badge that Friday afternoon, with tears of anger in his eyes after 11 years of impeccable service, nobody imagined the nightmare that was about to begin. What the security cameras recorded that first night without Marcus left the Detroit police completely speechless. What seemed to be just lights turning on by themselves was actually something far more sinister, far more real, and far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover about Marcus Thompson, about that factory, and about the real reason for his dismissal will make you completely rethink everything you know about loyalty, injustice, and courage. And before I tell you what really happened that night and reveal the shocking truth Marcus discovered, I need to ask you something. If this story is affecting you, if you've ever felt undervalued at work, ignored when you tried to do the right thing, or if you know someone who has experienced a similar injustice, leave a comment below. Seriously, I read them all, and I love knowing that these stories are touching real people, creating genuine connections between us. And look, if you're enjoying this content, click that like button below. It seems silly, but it's this simple gesture that makes the YouTube algorithm show this video to more people who need to hear stories like Marcus's. Your participation here is literally what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content that values the true everyday heroes, those ordinary people doing extraordinary things that nobody notices. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button now and activate the bell, because every week I bring you real stories like this that make you reflect, get emotional, and see the world in a different way. Stories about people who were underestimated, but who ultimately proved their worth in unimaginable ways. Because I believe that everyone deserves to be heard, and this channel exists to give voice to these stories that need to be told. Now let's go back to that terrifying early morning in Detroit, because what happened after the lights turned on by themselves goes far beyond any supernatural explanation. The truth behind those empty hallways and those security cameras was something Marcus had been trying to expose for weeks, something that almost cost him his life, and something that would expose a criminal network that no one in the company's management wanted to see. Marcus Thompson was 54 years old when all this happened. A man with broad shoulders, military-style gray hair, and eyes that never lost focus. A Gulf War veteran, Marcus carried with him that unwavering discipline that only those who served in the armed forces truly understand. He wasn't just a night watchman at Riverside Manufacturing. He was the Watchman. 11 years dedicated to that place, 11 years walking the same dark corridors, climbing the same rusty metal stairs, checking the same doors and windows with the precision of a Swiss watch. While other security guards who had worked there over the years dozed in their chairs, watched games on their phones, or simply pretended to patrol, Marcus treated his job like a mission. Every hour, without exception, he walked through the entire factory. He had a worn notebook where he noted absolutely everything. A loose screw on the floor of Building 3, a window that creaked differently in the storage area, tire marks in the back parking lot that shouldn't be there. For Marcus, no detail was too small, no observation was irrelevant. That factory had become part of his identity, an extension of his own existence. He knew every corner of that place like the back of his hand. He knew exactly where the echo of his footsteps changed tone, indicating a shift in the structure of the walls. He knew the characteristic metallic smell of each area and could identify when something was out of place just by the air temperature in certain corridors. This deep connection with the environment wasn't paranoia, it was expertise. It was the result of more than a decade of total attention, complete presence, and genuine commitment to the safety of that space. But here's the cruel irony of the story. Everything that made Marcus an exceptional professional was exactly what the company's new management saw as a flaw. When the young executives took control of Riverside Manufacturing, they brought with them that modern corporate mentality, obsessed with efficiency, cost-cutting, and technological solutions. To them, Marcus was just the old bore who complains about everything. An outdated employee who insisted on doing reports by hand, who questioned changes in safety protocols, who pointed out problems they preferred to ignore. The transformation in the company culture was brutal. Decisions that previously took employee experience into account were now made exclusively based on spreadsheets and financial projections. The hidden truth behind all that modernization was simple. People are expensive. Technology seems cheaper on paper. And Marcus, with his 11 years' salary and accumulated benefits, represented a red number that needed to be eliminated. The impact of this mentality went far beyond finances, but nobody in the boardroom wanted to see it. And it was precisely this obsessive dedication, this refusal to simply turn a blind eye, this uncomfortable insistence on pointing out irregularities that sealed Marcus's fate that Friday afternoon. Because sometimes in the corporate world, being too good at what you do can become your biggest problem. Sometimes seeing too much can turn you into an obstacle for those who prefer to remain blind. What Marcus didn't know that morning, when he woke up for another day of work, was that it would be his last shift. And what management didn't realize was that firing Marcus Thompson would be the worst decision they could make. At 4 o'clock that Friday afternoon, Marcus received the message every employee dreads. Report to the administrative office immediately. He climbed the stairs with that heavy feeling in his chest, that sensation you get when you know something bad is about to happen. Upon entering the room, he found Brad Sullivan sitting behind the desk. Fingers intertwined, that cold corporate smile plastered on his face. Brad was only 32 years old, recently promoted to regional manager, after impressing executives with presentations full of colorful graphs and promises of aggressive cuts in operating costs. He was the type of manager who had never set foot on a factory floor at night, who had never felt the weight of the responsibility of protecting a multi-million-dollar asset alone in the darkness. Brad went straight to the point, without beating around the bush, without that preparatory conversation that at least feigns some humanity. "Thompson, the company is cutting costs. Your service is no longer needed." The words came out of his mouth with the same naturalness with which someone orders a coffee. 11 years of absolute dedication summarized in an 8-second sentence. Marcus felt his blood boil, but maintained his composure. Veterans know how to control their emotions, even when the world is crumbling around them. He tried to argue, pulling from his backpack those reports from the last few weeks that he had meticulously documented. "Mr. Sullivan, have you read my reports? We've had 3 attempted break-ins at the back doors in the last month. Equipment is being moved around during the night. There are clear signs of forced entry in the storage area. I found tool marks on the locks, footprints in areas that should be sealed. Something very serious is happening here, and we need to investigate before it's too late." Marcus spoke with the urgency of someone who truly cared, someone who knew every detail of those irregularities because he experienced it firsthand every night. But Brad just laughed. A short, condescending laugh, the kind that carries all the contempt one generation can feel for another. You see ghosts, old man. You're paranoid. Look, I understand. You work alone at night. Your mind starts playing tricks on you. But the reality is that we're going to install a state-of-the-art automatic camera system with artificial intelligence and motion sensors. We're going to save $50,000 a year by eliminating the costs of human surveillance. It's that simple. Technology, Thompson, the future. The way Brad delivered that last sentence made it clear that, in his view, Marcus represented the obsolete past that needed to be discarded. The hidden truth behind that dismissal had layers that neither of the two men in that room could fully see at that moment. For Brad, it was just a smart financial decision, one less number on the payroll, a victory to show his superiors. For Marcus, it was the destruction of an identity built over more than a decade, the brutal message that his experience, his commitment, and his intuition were absolutely worthless compared to an Excel spreadsheet. The impact of that conversation went far beyond the professional aspect. It touched on something much deeper about value, respect, and human dignity. Marcus handed over his badge without saying anything more. He put his worn notebook in his backpack, the same notebook that contained revelations that could have prevented the nightmare that was about to begin. As he left the room, tears of anger burned his eyes, but he didn't let any fall in front of Brad. He walked through the factory corridors for the last time as an employee, passing colleagues who looked away with that typical embarrassment of someone witnessing an injustice but lacking the courage to speak up. Nobody, absolutely nobody, had the decency to say thank you, not even a "we're sorry" or "good luck." 11 years of impeccable service ended in utter silence and indifference. As Marcus walked through the Riverside Manufacturing gate for the last time that afternoon, his journey was far from over. In fact, it was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. And if you've been following every detail of this transformation, every revelation of this unbelievable case, subscribe to the channel now, because the behind the scenes of what happened in the next few hours will show that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't the one we plan, but the one that truth itself delivers. That same night, while Marcus was trying to process the humiliation in his small apartment, the Riverside factory was about to witness something that would make Brad Sullivan question every decision he had ever made. That same night, for the first time in 11 years, the Riverside factory was completely empty of human presence. The new security system was in place, functioning perfectly according to all technical indicators. High-resolution IP cameras covered every angle, motion sensors strategically positioned in all corridors, alarms connected directly to the monitoring center of the outsourced security company. Brad Sullivan went home that night with a satisfied smile on his face, convinced he had made the right decision. After all, technology was infinitely superior to people, right? No days off, no salaries, no complaints, no paranoid reports about ghosts and imaginary intruders. It was corporate efficiency in its purest form. But at exactly 3:17 in the morning, something completely impossible began to happen. The lights in the first building came on. Not all at once, not due to some short circuit or electrical fault. They came on in sequence, one section after another, as if invisible hands were flipping each switch individually. Then came the lights in the second building. Same thing. Lighting up in slow, deliberate progression, following a specific path through the empty industrial corridors. Next, the third building. The sequence was perfect, methodical, almost ritualistic in its precision. Anyone watching from the outside would have had the unsettling impression that someone was walking through the factory corridors, turning on the lights as they went, following a very specific route through the industrial complex. But the alarm system didn't go off. Not a single alert. The cameras continued recording normally, transmitting their images to the cloud servers without detecting any anomaly. The motion sensors, those same state-of-the-art sensors that Brad had praised so much in the meeting with the directors, remained completely silent. No record of intrusion, no indication of human presence, no breach of security perimeters. According to all the technical data, there was absolutely no one inside that factory. And yet, the lights kept turning on, following that. inexplicable pattern that defied all rational logic. The transformation of that space from a dark and silent industrial building into something brilliantly illuminated happened before the cameras, but without any apparent explanation. It was as if the factory itself had come to life, as if the walls and corridors were reacting to a presence that technology couldn't detect. The visual impact of it, if someone were observing from afar, would be terrifying. Imagine looking at an abandoned industrial complex in the middle of the night and seeing slowly, section by section, the lights begin to illuminate in a ghostly progression. It's not the kind of thing you expect to see on a typical Friday in Detroit. It's not the kind of phenomenon that can be easily explained by technical glitches or electrical coincidences. There was something profoundly disturbing in the deliberation of that pattern, in the way the lights followed a specific route, as if they were tracing a map or following the footprints of someone who was no longer there. The truth hidden behind those lights turning on by themselves was far more complex and far more terrifying than any supernatural explanation could suggest. But at that moment, in the early hours of that morning, the Riverside factory kept its secrets silently, illuminated from end to end, completely empty according to all security systems, but clearly being traversed by something or someone that Brad Sullivan's technology simply couldn't see. The revelations that would come in the following hours would expose not only the flaws in that modern surveillance system, but also a far more sinister network operating behind the scenes of that factory. And here's the detail that makes it all the more chilling. That route the lights were tracing, that specific path through the pavilions, was exactly the same route Marcus Thompson took during his nightly rounds. Every corridor, every turn, every illuminated section corresponded perfectly to the route he had religiously followed for 11 years, as if something or someone was deliberately replicating the steps of the guard who had been fired just hours before. When the sun rose the next morning and Brad Sullivan arrived at the factory for his morning routine, he was about to get the biggest shock of his career. Brad Sullivan arrived at the factory on Saturday morning around 8 o'clock, carrying his coffee and that characteristic confidence of someone who believes he's made all the right decisions. But when his car pulled into the parking lot, he immediately realized something was wrong, terribly wrong. The entire factory was lit up. Every window glowed with artificial light in broad daylight. His heart raced. He immediately thought of a break-in, vandalism, every possible worst-case scenario. He parked hastily and ran to the main entrance, unlocking the doors with trembling hands. But when he entered, he found everything exactly as it should be. No forced doors, no equipment out of place, no sign of intrusion or tampering, only the lights. All the factory lights were on, illuminating the empty corridors with that cold, artificial light that seemed to scream that something was profoundly wrong. Brad felt that chill run down his spine, that kind of primal fear you feel when faced with something you can't rationally explain. He went straight to the monitoring room. He needed to review the recordings, understand what had happened during the night. He sat down in front of the monitors and began rewinding the camera footage. What he saw in the next few hours would completely transform his mindset about everything he had said the previous day about technology being superior to people. The normal resolution recordings showed exactly what his eyes were seeing now, the lights turning on by themselves, one after the other, in perfect sequence. No visible human figures, no shadows, no obvious explanation. But it was when Brad accessed the infrared recordings from the motion sensors that his blood literally froze. There, in the thermal images that captured heat signatures, was something that defied all logic. Thermal trails, heat marks in the unmistakable shape of human footprints, glowing in shades of red and orange against the cold blue background of the environment. And these footprints weren't random or scattered aimlessly. They followed exactly, with millimeter precision, the route Marcus Thompson took during his nightly rounds. Every corridor Marcus usually checked, every staircase he climbed, every corner where he stopped to inspect locks and windows. The sequence was identical, as if someone had perfectly memorized the movements of the dismissed security guard and was deliberately replicating his nightly journey. Brad ran his finger across the screen, following those ghostly tracks. Pavilion 1, East corridor, north staircase, storage area, back down the west corridor. It was Marcus's route. He'd seen the old man take that route hundreds of times during daytime inspections. And now, less than 12 hours after firing him, someone or something was repeating those same steps, leaving thermal signatures that indicated a real human presence, a warm body, physical movement. But the video cameras showed absolutely no one. It was as if a ghost was repeating the work of the guard they had so cruelly dismissed. The impact of this revelation was devastating for Brad. All those arrogant words about Marcus seeing ghosts and being paranoid came back to haunt him with full force. The hidden truth was beginning to emerge in a terrifying way. Either something genuinely supernatural was happening there, or someone with very specific knowledge of Marcus's routines was operating in that factory using technology capable of bypassing visual cameras while leaving thermal traces. Neither option was comforting. Both suggested that he had made a monumental mistake in dismissing the only man who truly knew that place. Brad's hands trembled as he scrolled through the recordings, watching those thermal trails crisscross the factory for nearly 2 hours, following Marcus's route with unsettling precision until finally disappearing around 5 in the morning just before sunrise. His arrogant certainty transformed into pure terror in a matter of minutes before those monitors. He picked up the phone with trembling fingers and dialed the police. His voice barely held steady as he explained the situation to the operator. Impossible intrusion, ghostly presence, I need help immediately. What Brad didn't yet know was that those thermal traces weren't from ghosts, but from something much more real and much more dangerous. The revelations that were about to come behind the scenes of this investigation would expose a truth that Marcus had been trying to warn about for weeks, a truth that almost cost him his life, and that now threatened the entire Riverside Manufacturing operation. If you're following every detail of this increasingly intense investigation, subscribe to the channel now, because what the police discovered when they arrived at that factory will completely change everything you've imagined so far. Detective Sarah Mitchell was about to enter the scene, and with her the journey to unravel this mystery was about to take a turn that no one, absolutely no one, could have predicted. Detective Sarah Mitchell arrived at the Riverside factory around 10 in the morning, accompanied by a full investigation team. Sarah was a veteran of the Detroit Police Department, with 15 years of experience on complex cases, known for her methodical approach and for never accepting overly simplistic explanations. She had that keen instinct that only years on the streets can develop, that ability to sense when something doesn't add up, when the story being told has hidden layers waiting to be uncovered. While the forensic technicians began analyzing the camera footage and scanning the security systems, Sarah watched Brad Sullivan nervously explain the events of the previous night, gesticulating excessively, speaking too fast, with the typical behavior of someone trying to convince himself as much as others. But Sarah wasn't just interested in the technical data and the ghostly images. She wanted to understand the human element of that story, the behind-the-scenes relationships and decisions that led to that point. It was when Brad mentioned, almost casually, that he had fired the night watchman the previous afternoon that something clicked in the detective's mind. The transformation in her expression was visible. Wait, you fired the security guard less than 12 hours before all this happened. Brad mumbled some justification about cost-cutting and modernization, but Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She had a new line of investigation, and unlike Brad, she wasn't afraid to follow it wherever it led. Sarah decided to do something Brad hadn't even considered: go to Marcus Thompson and talk to him in person. She got his address from the company's human resources files and drove to the former security guard's small apartment in Detroit's working-class neighborhood. It was almost 2 in the afternoon when she knocked on the door. Marcus answered, wearing an old flannel shirt, unshaven, his eyes tired from a sleepless night. He was watching some game on TV, trying to distract his mind from the previous day's humiliation. When he saw Sarah's badge, his face showed a mixture of confusion and concern. Sarah introduced herself and quickly explained the situation. Marcus invited her in and listened silently, that military discipline preventing him from interrupting or reacting emotionally before he had all the information. When Sarah finished describing the night's events, Marcus immediately provided his alibi without her having to ask. He had spent the entire night at Riley's pub, a local bar frequented by veterans, drinking with friends, trying to process the anger and frustration of his dismissal. He had at least 20 witnesses, not counting the bar's own security cameras and credit card receipts marking his transactions throughout the night. The alibi was solid, unquestionable. But it was when Sarah mentioned the thermal trails, describing that pattern of ghostly footprints following exactly the route of his nightly patrols, that something completely changed in Marcus's expression. All the color drained from his face. His hands began to tremble visibly. He stood up, walked to the window and stared at the street for a few seconds in absolute silence, as if making a crucial decision, weighing risks and consequences on the scales of his conscience. When he finally turned to face Sarah, his voice came out trembling, laden with a weight that went far beyond personal fear. "Detective," he said, each word measured and deliberate, "I tried to warn them. For weeks I tried to get those people to listen to me. Something deeply wrong is happening in that factory. And it's nothing supernatural, it's not a ghost, it's not old man's paranoia like they said." He paused, took a deep breath, and continued with an intensity that made Sarah instinctively grab her notepad. "It's much, much worse than that. What's happening in the basements and tunnels of that factory at night is real, it's criminal, and it's dangerous enough that they tried to silence me permanently." Sarah felt that familiar tingling sensation that every good investigator recognizes. That moment when you know you're about to uncover something big, something that will blow the case up in completely unexpected directions. The revelations Marcus was about to share would transform a seemingly supernatural investigation into something far more concrete and far more sinister. The truth hidden behind the scenes at Riverside Manufacturing was finally beginning to emerge, and its impact would be devastating for far more people than just Brad Sullivan. Marcus walked to his room and returned carrying that worn notebook, the same notebook Brad had dismissed the day before, and placed it on the table in front of Sarah with a heavy thud that echoed like a final sentence. Sarah pulled up a chair and sat down as Marcus opened that worn notebook with the reverence of someone revealing something sacred and dangerous at the same time. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, 11 years of meticulous records documenting every detail of the factory's nightlife. But it was the last pages that made Sarah's eyes widen. There it all was. Detailed drawings of the basement layouts, maps of the underground tunnels she didn't even know existed, precise times marked in red pen, observations of suspicious movements, vehicle license plates, descriptions of people all noted with the precision of a professional investigator. Marcus began to explain, his voice gaining strength as he recounted the story he had kept inside for weeks. The Riverside factory had been built in the 1940s during World War II, as part of the American industrial effort. At that time, they built an extensive network of underground tunnels connecting the different buildings, originally used for the safe movement of materials and as air raid shelters. Over the decades, these tunnels were forgotten, sealed off, removed from modern architectural plans. Most current employees didn't even know they existed. But Marcus knew every inch of those basements because checking the underground areas was part of his weekly inspection routine. It was about 2 months ago that he began to notice the irregularities. Forced locks on doors leading to the tunnels, fresh tire tracks in areas that should have been sealed for years, signs of recent movement in dust-covered corridors. Marcus did what any good security professional would do. He started investigating. He discreetly changed his patrol schedule, began showing up at different times, observing, documenting, gathering evidence. And that's when he discovered the terrifying truth. A criminal group was using those forgotten tunnels for a massive arms and drug trafficking operation. They entered and exited during the early morning hours, using camouflaged entrances at the back of the property, moved cargo through the tunnels, and used the abandoned basements as temporary storage. What was most disturbing was the sophistication of the operation. Those people knew Marcus's schedule perfectly. They knew exactly when he made his rounds in the basements, and they avoided any contact for weeks. But when Marcus deliberately changed his routine, appearing at random times, He almost paid with his life. One night, he went down into the tunnels outside his usual hours and came across 3 armed men unloading boxes from a truck. The transformation of that moment of shock into pure terror happened in a fraction of a second. The men saw him, screamed, and began to chase him through the dark corridors. Marcus ran like he had never run before, using his superior knowledge of those tunnels to escape via alternative routes they didn't know about. He barely survived that night, surfaced with his heart pounding in his chest, and immediately reported everything to company management. He showed them his notes, his drawings, his evidence. He explained the danger, the urgent need to involve the police to conduct a proper investigation. But the response he received was devastating. The managers didn't believe him. They said he was seeing things, that he was paranoid, that they were probably just homeless people using the tunnels as shelter. Brad Sullivan specifically mocked him, saying it was just old men's stories about shadows. The hidden truth behind that dismissive reaction was perhaps even more sinister than Marcus imagined at that moment. "They thought I was crazy, Detective," Marcus said, his voice thick with bitterness. "They fired me to shut me up, to stop making waves, to make me drop my inconvenient accusations, and now these criminals are literally celebrating my departure." He pointed to the notes about the thermal traces. "Those lights turning on following my route? It's not a paranormal phenomenon. It's a message. It's them saying, now the factory is ours, the only obstacle has been removed, we can operate freely." It's a show of power, of control, maybe even a provocation. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The impact of that revelation completely reshaped the case. They weren't dealing with random break-ins or inexplicable phenomena. They were facing an organized criminal operation, sophisticated enough to map security routines, bold enough to threaten witnesses, and seemingly connected enough to operate with impunity even after being reported. The revelations emerging from behind the scenes of that worn notebook were explosive. If you're following every detail of this increasingly dangerous investigation, subscribe to the channel now, because what happened in the next few hours, when Sarah took that evidence back to the department, was absolutely cinematic. The police operation that was about to be set up would be one of the biggest Detroit had seen in years, and Marcus Thompson, the despised and humiliated security guard, was about to become the centerpiece of it all. Sarah returned to the police department with Marcus's notebook as if she were carrying pure dynamite. She called an emergency meeting with the commander of the organized crime unit, and in less than 2 hours the room was full of detectives, tactical agents, and prosecutors analyzing every page of those meticulous notes. The transformation in everyone's demeanor was visible as they began to understand the magnitude of what Marcus had discovered on his own. This wasn't the paranoia of a bored security guard. It was professional-level investigation documenting a sophisticated criminal operation. Detailed maps of the tunnels, movement schedules, vehicle descriptions. Everything was there, just waiting for someone to take it seriously. The decision was unanimous and immediate. They would mount an operation for that very night. Time was critical because if the criminals were already celebrating Marcus's departure with that display of lights, it meant they planned to intensify their activities, now that the only obstacle had been removed. The tactical team began preparing immediately, studying the maps Marcus had drawn, planning entry points, and coordinating the encirclement strategy. Marcus was invited to participate as a consultant. After all, no one knew those tunnels better than he did. He accepted without hesitation, despite the obvious risk, despite being technically unemployed and having no obligation to put himself in danger again. At 3 o'clock in the morning, exactly the same time the lights had started to come on the previous night, more than 40 police officers surrounded the Riverside factory in absolute silence. Dark, tactical vans were strategically positioned, snipers on the rooftops of adjacent buildings, entry teams ready at the multiple access points to the tunnels that Marcus had identified. The operation was coordinated with military precision. At Sarah's signal, all the teams entered simultaneously, descending into that forgotten underground world that Marcus had been trying to expose for weeks. And Marcus was absolutely right. What the police found in the basements and tunnels of Riverside Manufacturing was a massive criminal operation in full swing. Hundreds of stacked boxes containing automatic weapons, military ammunition, and kilos of high-value drugs. 2 trucks were being unloaded at that very moment by men who panicked when they saw the police flashlights and bulletproof vests bursting into their hideouts. The resistance was brief. 7 men were arrested that very morning, handcuffs clicking on wrists as Miranda rights echoed through the damp tunnels. But the most shocking revelation, the one that made even the most experienced police officers shake their heads in disbelief, came when they identified one of the prisoners. James Fletcher, security supervisor at Riverside Manufacturing itself, was among those detained. The man responsible for overseeing the factory's security was actually being paid to ensure that the criminal operation could function without interruption. The hidden truth finally exploded in all its rot. Fletcher received substantial monthly bribes to ignore the illegal activities, to discourage any investigation, to ensure that Marcus's reports were disregarded and ridiculed by management. Further investigation would reveal that the scheme was moving more than $2 million a month. Weapons were being trafficked to gangs in 3 different states. Drugs were being distributed through a network that stretched across the American Midwest. The abandoned factory and its forgotten tunnels were the logistical heart of an operation that had taken years to establish, and Marcus Thompson, the security guard everyone called Paranoid, the employee who was fired and publicly humiliated, had uncovered it all on his own, using only his stubborn dedication and his refusal to ignore what his eyes were seeing. The impact of that police operation reverberated far beyond that night. In the following weeks, more than 20 people would be indicted in connection with the scheme, including distributors, intermediaries, and even some high-level buyers. Tens of millions of dollars in criminal assets were seized. But that morning, as the last suspects were being loaded into police cars and forensic teams began cataloging the evidence, Sarah found Marcus standing at the entrance to the tunnels, gazing at that subterranean world that had almost cost him his life, silent tears streaming down his face. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of validation, of justice finally being served, of relief at knowing he wasn't crazy, that his journey of denouncing had not been in vain. Marcus wasn't seeing ghosts. He was seeing the truth that no one wanted to see. And because of his courage, because he refused to stay silent even when he was despised and threatened, he almost lost his life. But in the end, his persistence saved countless lives that would have been destroyed by those weapons and drugs. What happened to Marcus Thompson in the days following that police operation is the part that will restore your faith in humanity. Marcus Thompson's story exploded onto Detroit headlines the morning after the police raid, and within hours was going viral nationally. Every major news outlet wanted to tell the story of the ignored and humiliated night watchman who, working completely alone, had uncovered a multi-million-dollar criminal operation while his superiors called him crazy and paranoid. Social media ablaze with the case. People shared the story by the thousands, commenting on their own experiences of being discredited at work, of having their concerns ignored by arrogant bosses. Marcus became an instant symbol of everything wrong with the modern corporate mindset that values spreadsheets over people and technology over human experience. The shift in the public narrative was absolute and brutal for some involved. Brad Sullivan, the young manager who had fired Marcus so arrogantly just days before, was immediately removed from his position. Riverside Manufacturing's internal investigation revealed that he had ignored numerous reports, not only from Marcus, but from other employees who had noticed irregularities over the months. His obsession with cost-cutting and his refusal to listen to experienced workers had created the perfect environment for that criminal operation to flourish unchecked. Brad was officially fired for gross negligence and managerial incompetence. His promising corporate career was ruined before it even truly began, destroyed by the very arrogant decisions he thought would make him shine. Riverside Manufacturing itself went into desperate damage control mode. The company was facing a public relations nightmare, with its brand associated with arms trafficking, drugs, and internal corruption. But more than that, they faced potential lawsuits and investigations into how this had been allowed to happen under their roof. The board made a strategic, but also, surprisingly, genuine decision. They issued a public apology to Marcus Thompson at a formal press conference. The company's CEO, visibly embarrassed, read a statement admitting that the company had failed to recognize Marcus's value and dedication, that his legitimate concerns had been unfairly dismissed, and that the company was deeply sorry. But the apology was just the beginning. Riverside not only offered to rehire Marcus immediately, but also promoted him to safety supervisor for the entire operation with a salary that was more than double what he received as a night watchman. They also offered a substantial bonus as compensation for the unfair dismissal and the danger he had faced. Marcus accepted not because he needed to prove anything to anyone, but because he genuinely loved the job and wanted to ensure the factory was truly safe from then on. The impact of his rehiring was symbolic for the entire workforce, a message that experience and dedication still mattered. But the honors didn't stop there. The Detroit Police Department held a special ceremony where Marcus received a commendation of civil recognition for his courage and contribution to dismantling a dangerous criminal operation. The mayor was present, and Detective Sarah Mitchell gave an emotional speech about how Marcus's persistence had saved countless lives. Cameras captured Marcus wearing his only suit, tears in his eyes, finally receiving the recognition he always deserved. He became a symbol of perseverance, of doing the right thing even when no one is watching, of maintaining integrity even when it would be much easier to simply close your eyes and move on. Journalists from all over the country wanted to interview him. Morning shows, true crime podcasts, documentaries in production. Marcus granted a few interviews, always humble, always deflecting credit to Detective Sarah and the police team. But it was in one of these interviews that he revealed something that made the story even more moving and inspiring. When he received his first major paycheck as a security supervisor, Marcus used a substantial portion of that money to create a support fund for unemployed veterans in the Detroit area. He knew all too well what it was like to be discarded, ignored, treated as obsolete after years of dedicated service. "No one deserves to be discarded like that," Marcus said during the interview, his voice firm but heavy with emotion. "No veteran who served this country, no worker who dedicated years of their life to a company, no person who is simply trying to do the right thing deserves to be treated like disposable trash. If my story can help other people be heard, if this money can help other veterans get back on their feet, then it was all worth it." The revelations about Marcus's character continued to surprise everyone. Here was a man who had every right to be bitter, vengeful, but chose to transform his pain into purpose. If you are being moved by this journey from injustice to redemption, subscribe to the channel now, because the final message of this story is something we all need to hear. Marcus Thompson's complete transformation from discarded vigilante to national hero was documented in every headline, but the true impact of his story was only beginning to spread. The story of Marcus Thompson teaches us something profoundly powerful about human nature, about work, and about what truly matters in organizations and society. It shows us that we should never, absolutely never, underestimate the people who are in the trenches doing the hard, dirty, and often invisible work, while others sit comfortably in air-conditioned offices, looking only at spreadsheets and colorful charts. Marcus was called a bore because he cared too much. He was labeled paranoid because he was seeing truths that others preferred to ignore. And in the end, he was the only one who truly cared about that factory, the only one who knew every corner of it, the only one willing to risk his safety to protect the assets of the company that employed him. The hidden truth this story exposes goes far beyond a specific case of organized crime in Detroit. It reveals something systemic about how we treat experienced workers in the modern era of corporate efficiency. How many Marcus Thompsons are out there being ignored right now? How many dedicated people are trying to sound the alarm about real problems only to be dismissed as obstacles to progress? The mindset that led Brad Sullivan to fire Marcus is the same mindset that permeates countless companies. The belief that technology can completely replace human experience, that numbers on spreadsheets tell the whole story, that older employees are just costs to be cut instead of valuable assets to be preserved. Marcus was the paranoid employee who was actually seeing the only truth that mattered. While everyone around him chose the convenience of willful blindness, he chose the difficulty of keeping his eyes open. And when injustice almost won, when it seemed that the criminals had triumphed and the good man had been silenced and discarded, it was precisely his stubborn persistence that saved everything. It wasn't technology, it wasn't automated systems, it wasn't managers with MBAs and PowerPoint presentations. It was a 54-year-old man with a worn notebook and an unwavering moral compass who made the difference. The impact of this story resonates because we've all felt like Marcus at some point in our lives. We've all tried to raise awareness about something important and been ignored. We've all worked hard on something only to see our efforts minimized or disregarded. We've all faced that moment when doing the right thing seemed to cost us everything, while doing the wrong thing seemed to reward others around us. Marcus's journey from humiliation to redemption is not only inspiring, it's profoundly human and universally relatable. And here's the most important part of this message. Marcus's story didn't end with his personal redemption. It became a catalyst for bigger changes. Riverside Manufacturing completely revamped its safety structure and created direct channels for employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation. Other companies in Detroit began re-evaluating how they treat experienced workers. The fund Marcus created for veterans has already helped dozens of people find jobs and dignity. The revelations from that case created ripples that continue to expand, touching lives Marcus will never know personally. This is the true transformation that happens when a person refuses to remain silent in the face of injustice. The behind-the-scenes story shows that courage doesn't have to be dramatic or instantaneous. Sometimes courage is simply continuing to take notes in a worn notebook night after night, even when no one is reading. Sometimes courage is not giving up on the truth even when everyone is saying you're wrong. Sometimes courage is keeping your integrity intact, even when it would be much easier and more profitable to simply look the other way. Marcus Thompson could have become bitter. He could have sued the company for millions and retired comfortably. He could have used his sudden fame solely for his own benefit. But he chose a different path. He chose to return to the work he loved. He chose to use his platform to help other veterans. He chose to transform his pain into purpose. That ultimate choice defines who Marcus truly is, far more than any of the decisions that were imposed upon him. And now I want to hear from you, because this story doesn't end here. It continues in every person who hears it and recognizes themselves in it. Have you ever been in a situation where no one believed you, but you were right all along? Have you ever felt like you were shouting into the void, trying to warn about something important and being completely ignored? Leave your story in the comments, and if you made it to the end of this video and felt that this message touched something real inside you, write below, "This story was for me." I read all the comments, and I love knowing that these stories are creating real connections with real people who go through similar situations. And look, if you've stuck with me throughout Marcus's journey, from that terrifying early morning with the lights turning on by themselves to his complete redemption, click that like button below. Seriously, it helps me understand that this type of content resonates with you, that it's worth continuing to delve into these stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when no one is watching. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, now is the perfect time. Every week I bring you real stories like this one, stories that make you reflect on justice, perseverance, and the value of maintaining your integrity even when the whole world seems to be telling you that you're wrong. Hit that subscribe button and activate the bell because you won't want to miss what's coming next. And since you've made it this far, there's a video over here that I think you'll really enjoy. It's another true story of someone who was completely underestimated, but ultimately proved them right in a way no one expected. Click and continue with me there, because this journey of discovering these incredible stories is just beginning. Until the next video, and remember, the truth always comes out. It may take time, but it always comes out.